Hey, welcome everybody. My name is Robert Cavolo, and on behalf of the Center for Faith and Work LA, I am honored and delighted to welcome you to this, our 7th Reimagining Work event, and we are focusing on aerospace in LA. And already I'm just excited by the people that have come today. I was introducing people to people who worked in the same company. There was 3 of you from SpaceX that didn't know each other till this event. And so it's wonderful to get together and to talk about aerospace as those who want to understand what it means to live out our faith in this particular sector. So I want to say a few things about the Center for Faith and Work LA, what gets us out of bed in the morning, why we're excited doing what we do. And it really comes down to this. We really believe that God cares about all aspects of our lives. We oftentimes say that Jesus Christ is Lord of everything. We say that God cares about everything. But the reality is that many times as Christians, when it comes to our 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, we don't really know what it means deeply to live out our faith in what we spend most of our life doing. You think about your waking hours, most of your life is spent in your waking hours at work. And we don't really know how to connect our faith to that. We understand if you go to church and say you serve teaching Sunday school, or you're on the evangelism team, or maybe you're helping the poor, or any number of church programs, there it's pretty clear how your faith connects to what you're doing. But if you step into your Monday through Friday and you are working on a project, you're doing something with technology, you are a part, you're putting together spreadsheets or part of a project team or any number of different things you might be doing. Sometimes how does this even connect to my faith? And that is what we are interested in developing as Christians at Center for Faith and Work. And so there are many good ways in which we can love God, but we want to focus in on really this important aspect of our work. And there's many people in this room who spend not just hours, not just months, but years developing themselves as professionals in the aerospace industry, cultivating their trained skills to do what they do. And we want to ask, what does that mean to do that as a way of loving and serving God? So to get that conversation going, what we often do is we bring up 2 points. The first is that when we look at the Bible, we see a God who loves to work, right? Oftentimes out in the world, when you hear the word work, it's a 4-letter word, okay? And in a bad sense, right? So it is 4 letters, but it's a 4-letter word. But when we open up the Bible, we see immediately a God who is at work, a God who has a work week, a God who immediately dives in. And if you start looking at the first 2 chapters of Genesis and you start detailing all the things God is doing as God is creating all the layers of the world around us. I mean, you think about all the systems and the beauty and just the depth, the chemical, the biological, the physical aspects to creation. God is producing, God's designing, God is manufacturing, God is planning, God is ordering. God is doing a number of the same things that we do on a regular basis. God does all this, and then when God is finished doing all this, God creates mankind in his image and says, continue to do this, continue to bring beauty and order and goodness into this world that I've made. And of course, if you know the story of the Bible, it doesn't end there. Humankind falls in rebellion to God and God's command and commissioning. And instead, we turn our energies and all of the capacities that God has given us in on ourselves. And instead of bringing flourishing and beauty and goodness and order into the world, we turn that in on ourselves. And but the story doesn't end there in the Bible, as we know. It continues on. Christ comes to redeem all things. And God is aiming in turning what is a garden in the book of Genesis into a city in the book of Revelation. It is a city. It is replete with culture and with design. And I think of all the things that characterize, all the technologies that characterize a city in the New Jerusalem. And that's where God is going with this. All right. Maybe someone can grab the door. Thanks, Margaret. So when we look at the Bible, we see that it's not just a story about how do we get a ticket to heaven when we die. It's actually a story in which we see a God who's deeply invested in this world that he created. So that is the vision of the Bible. And to that end, we devise these Reimagining Work series where we focus on a particular vocation in order to ask, what does it mean to be a part of this sector, this particular kind of vocation, and to do it in line with God's good purposes for this world, to live out our faith in tangible ways within this sector. And we do that not as people that have arrived. Nobody at the Center for Faith and Work, nor none of our panelists are sinless, people that have arrived. And we're all people that need to constantly be refreshed by the gospel and restored by the gospel in order to continue to pick up the things that God has given us to do in our quest to work in a way that honors God as those who are his image bearers. So that is what we're about. And we're excited about this, very frankly excited about this at Center for Faith and Work LA. And so thanks for joining our event. I do want to say one more thing about why we chose aerospace. Okay, many of you want to know aerospace. Why aerospace? There's lots of different industries. Well, one of the obvious answers is aerospace is a big industry in LA. It's a significant industry in LA. But there's some other things that are also important. Aerospace really provides a unique way to love God and serve our neighbors. And if you think about it, aerospace explores God's creation both on this planet and out in space, and it develops new technologies and services that extend our imagination not only to the common good and how to bless our neighbor, but also extend our imagination and how to worship God because of those ways in which we're learning more about his world. Aerospace develops new and better ways to reflect God's nature as we innovate and as we shape emerging technology through processes of engineering and design, and therefore reflect God as image bearers. And of course, as with all sectors, there are challenges that are unique to Christians in this sector. The industry presents difficult tensions to resolve with cost, schedule, performance matrices that projects involve. And, government oftentimes is involved in that, and commercial programs can become incredibly complex. A lot of programs I hear, sometimes they evolve over the course of years with many moving pieces, and many of those on our panel and many of you in this room can attest to this. There's the challenge of instantiating Christian principles of honesty and transparency into the design process. There's the challenge of understanding the mission that stakeholders have for a project or program, and to want to highlight and bring out the good in that, as well as raise concerns that might be needed. And we could tease out more, and we are going to tease out more this morning, and we're going to do it with some help. I am delighted to introduce our keynote speaker who is going to get the conversation going this morning. And our keynote this morning is Larry James. Larry James is currently the interim director of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, following 8 years as Deputy Director and Chief Operating Officer, where he managed the laboratory's solar system exploration, Mars, astronomy, physics, earth science, interplanetary network programs, and all business operations. Larry is also retired Lieutenant General with 35 years of service in the United States Air Force. James's 35 years military career included assignments as a space shuttle payload specialist, GPS program manager, Titan IV launch director, and commander of the 50th Space Wing at Schriever Air Force Base, Colorado. James has also served on the staff of the U.S. Space Command, Air Force Space Command, HQ Air Force. He was commander of the 14th Air Force at Vandenberg Air Force Base, responsible for all military satellite launch and C-2 operations, and was the director, Signals Intelligence Systems Acquisition and Operation Directorate at the National Reconnaissance Office, Washington, D.C. He was the director of Space Forces for Operation Iraqi Freedom at the Combined Air Operations Center, Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia. Larry James received his bachelor's degree in astronautical engineering from the U.S. Air Force Academy and his master's in aeronautics and astronautics from MIT. He was also a Draper Fellow at the Charles Stark Draper Laboratory. Wow, okay.
Should have stopped long ago.
Keep going, Larry. I just want to say on a personal note, I've gotten the chance to get to know Larry over the last 3.5 years, he and his wife. And, Larry is an incredibly impressive man with all kinds of accolades. But what impresses me the most about Larry is his deep, genuine love for God, his humility, and his kindness towards everybody he meets. He's always way more interested in you when he meets you than in himself. And I am thrilled, Larry, that you were able to come and begin the conversation today about what it means to living out our faith in the aerospace. So thank you. Please welcome with me, Larry James.
All right. Well, thank you, Robert, for that much too long introduction. And Robert mentioned, getting up out of bed in the morning to come here. What you don't know is, last Saturday, I was there, my wife was there, Steve and his wife were there for Robert's wedding. So Robert got back last night from his honeymoon. And I said, "You're not going to come down here and do this, are you? Really? Really? Does your wife know you're really going to do this?" The first day back after being married, and he comes here. So I think that speaks to some of the dedication that Roberts has to this organization and really what we're trying to do with respect to how do you live out your faith in the jobs that we are in, especially in the aerospace industry. I did like your analogy of how God is a builder and he designs and he puts things together. And I guarantee you he does not have any supply chain problems. But I'll show a few slides here in a minute. But one of the things I wanted to start with is, at least for me, and I would think for many of you, this has been a lifelong passion for me, to explore, to find out new things. I grew up in the 60s. I'm dating myself. I realize that. But, I watched Mercury, I watched Gemini, I watched Apollo. My dad took me to the Apollo 9 launch down at Cape Kennedy at the time. So it's just been a passion of mine, and I would say in many ways it's a calling. We talk about pastors being called to the mission field, whatever that may be, but at least for me, and I think maybe for many of you, working in this industry is a calling. I mean, it's your passion. You get to do incredible things, you get to explore new things, you create new knowledge, and that is just a wonderful place to be for an environment to be in. So, and I like to bring this out. Anybody know what this is? Saturn V, right? So this was a model rocket, Estes model rocket that I built when I was about 13 years old. I still have this. I mean, my mom, bless her soul, she passed away in February, but in my bedroom back at our house in Virginia, she kept my model rockets on the dresser. She never got rid of them. And so at one point I said, well, I want to have at least one of those. So this, you put a D engine in the bottom of this thing, you launch it up, it's got a parachute inside here, it comes down and lands. And so anyway, I think, we all have a passion and we all have gifts. And I think God wants us obviously to use those gifts where we are. And as Robert said, I mean, where we are most of the time is where? Slaving away at your desk, doing design or engineering or, computations or business or whatever it is. But how do you bring that all to light in terms of God's desire for you? And the big thing for me, I think, and I'll kind of talk about this, is just what we bring to the world and what you bring to your neighborhood and what you bring to the people around you in terms of understanding this universe, creating new capabilities that make our lives better. And really, God called us to use all of our talents, right? And at the end of the day, it's about ultimately spreading His light. But you can do that in a variety of different ways as you do your work. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit about, this knowledge or voyage of discovery that at JPL we embark upon every day. And I tell people there that in many ways you make history every day because you're doing something that no one else has ever done. And I know we have folks from SpaceX and Raytheon and Collins, but in many ways you're building something, you're designing something, you're doing something that's never been done, and you're figuring it out. And in many ways that makes people's lives around us better. It brings better understanding, it brings a sense of accomplishment and excitement, even if they're not in that industry. This past week you see William Shatner go up in Blue Origin, right? For someone who watched the original Star Trek series growing up, again, making myself older, but how cool is that? Here's Captain Kirk getting to go up into space. And I kept thinking, well, he was going to say, well, Spock, what are we doing up here or whatever. But the sense of just knowledge and excitement that we can bring in, frankly, a dark world, especially in these last couple of years where it's been difficult for many people, I think that's important work. And it's work we can do at our job as we shine Christ's light, but it's work we can do in our neighborhood to just bring that attitude that God is in control, Christ is in control, and there is a better destination for all of us. And again, you don't have to hit people over the head with that, but you live your life like that. And I think that's an amazing thing about what we get to do. So I'm going to start way out in the universe and bring it back to earth. So that's my 3 talking points. I'm not a pastor, but you got to have 3 points, right? So I don't know if that's 3 points, but so way out in the universe. This is our infrared telescope Spitzer, which was built at JPL. And you're looking out at the Andromeda Galaxy, Horsehead Nebula. And when you think about this stuff, back to Robert's comments about God building, designing, creating, and putting all this in place, it kind of blows your mind, doesn't it? I mean, the immensity and the vastness of God that spoke this into being, and we are a part of that creation, and we are a part of that plan. I hope that gives you a sense of just confidence and hope and the ability to just bring light into a dark world. I always tell this story, Caltech, I'm a Caltech employee. Caltech operates JPL. A dinner that I went to a couple years ago, 3 or 4 years ago now, but we had Kip Thorne, who's the winner of the Nobel Prize, right, for physics, having dinner with him, and we're talking about the creation of the universe and the Big Bang and all those sorts of things. And then I said, well, Kip, but how did the Big Bang start? And there's no answer to that from a physics perspective. And yet we have the answer. Genesis talks about the answer. God spoke and it happened. So when you think this incredible universe, God just spoke into being, I hope that gives you a sense of, just confidence, a sense of peace that no matter what's going on in this tiny little blue rock that, is just a speck in this mighty universe, God controls all this stuff. And so, for me at JPL, I get to think about that stuff a lot because, you're looking at these images or you're designing the next telescope. We're designing the Nancy Roman telescope, the coronagraph, which will allow us to see exoplanets around other stars. So you're thinking about the immensity of what God has created. And it kind of puts, I think, our lives a bit in perspective, doesn't it? In terms of, I know I've got a CDR coming up and I've got, 27 hours worth of work to do in 10 hours, but, okay, God, give me some perspective here. So that's Spitzer. And speaking of exoplanets, 25 years ago, we didn't know if there was any other solar system in the universe. We didn't have the technology that allowed us to determine that. But now we know. We see multiple planets around other stars. So we have a bunch of artists at JPL, and these are known exoplanets around known stars that they've designed these 30s-style travel posters. So if you want to go there, like this is a planet around a red star. So it's like where the grass is always redder on the other side, instead of greener. This is the TRAPPIST-1 system, which Spitzer helped discover. There's 10 or 12 planets all almost in the Earth zone there. They're all bunched together, so it's like your best habitable zone vacation within 12 parsecs of Earth. So anyway, just this sense that God created an incredible universe. And a lot of it, in terms of solar systems, looks like ours. There's planets, there's stars, and all this. There's order, as Robert mentioned. So that sense of order that God can give us as we're going about our daily walk, our daily job, and those sorts of things, very important. And then this is just, the latest data from our archive. We've got 4,500 confirmed exoplanets, et cetera, et cetera. In the terrestrial zone, almost 166. So that says, what did God do out there? We don't know, right? We don't know. But we're not going to limit God in terms of what he did. But we know that he made man in his own image here. So that's a pretty good thing. So we won't go through that. And then bringing it a little bit further into our solar system, Jupiter, largest planet in the solar system. Right, it's really cool for me because I go out at night, Jupiter's very bright in the sky, you can see it, with your naked eye, and then I sit back and say, and we have our Juno spacecraft going around Jupiter right now, trying to understand what's underneath these clouds, what's it's composed of. When you think about what God has given man the ability to do, to go out here, put a spacecraft around that planet and explore that planet, that's a pretty amazing thing. And again, as you do your work, as you interface with your neighbors and your friends, just bringing that sense of wonder, that sense of awe that I think God can instill in all of us is just a great way to be a witness around you. And again, it's not, hey, here's my Bible, let me give you a tract. That's not how we do it. But just being that example based on what God has done and God can do is pretty incredible. Anybody know about Europa? Know anything about Europa? All right, we got a hand. What is it?
It's the moon of Jupiter. We're sending a spacecraft to in a few years.
Okay, and what's unique about it? You didn't know there was going to be a test, did you?
Ocean world underneath the ice strip.
Wow, she gets an A.
I'm working on the project, so I better know.
Are you at JPL?
Yeah.
Oh, well, okay, excellent. So, you really passed the test, right? But yeah, this is a moon of Jupiter, Europa. And when we went out there with our Galileo spacecraft, which was orbiting Jupiter many years ago, we realized that this is an icy surface, but beneath that icy surface is water. And there's probably 2 to 3 times the amount of water underneath that icy surface that's on the entire Earth. So think about that. Again, 20, 30 years ago, we thought, okay, Earth's the only place that has water in our solar system. We can't find any evidence anywhere else. And now we realize there's these icy moons, Enceladus, Europa, tons of water out there. So, just amazing discovery. And what does that mean? What does that lead to? Well, that's why we're building what we call Europa Clipper, which will go launch in 2024 and orbit this moon. It's got ice-penetrating radar. It's got a bunch of spectrometers and all kinds of magnetometers, all kinds of instruments that will allow us to really characterize this moon. But again, just the scope of knowledge, the scope of creation, the surprises we find when we go out into the solar system and look out into the universe. It just, to me, it dazzles my mind that God is just, wow, beyond what we can hope or imagine, right? That's our Lord. So, that's Europa. And here's the spacecraft. You want to tell us what part you're working on?
So I think you'll maybe recognize me once I'm here a little longer and you'll have my mask on.
Yeah.
I just joined as the phase lead for the launching cruise part of the
Yeah. And we're right in the middle of recosting the Phase E for launching crews, which is another story. So yeah, this thing is going to have to, we're using, SpaceX people, raise your hand. We got a few. We're using a Falcon Heavy to launch this.
Awesome.
Yeah, out to Europa. We have to do a couple of gravity assists to get out there. So it's what, 5-7 years? I lose track.
5 1/4.
5 1/4, yeah. So it takes us 5 1/4 years just to get there after we launch.
Mission is only 4 years.
Yeah, for a 4-year mission, but it'll go longer than that. Always does. But, again, back to Robert's point of, using what God has given us to create, to make people's lives better, to explore, to gain knowledge. It's a gift. It's just an incredible gift. And to have the talents that are in this room to do these kind of things, we should use that gift. I love Paul's writing in Colossians, and in all your work, do it diligently. I'm paraphrasing, but we are called to work well by God and to do it diligently, to do it well, to be an example. And so I think, again, as you're in your workplace and thinking, well, how does this fit into my Christian walk? That's part of it. Just being a good worker, being a good employee, doing your best. And it leads to incredible things like this. So, and I couldn't, can we back up? That's a video.
Other side, go left.
Go left. Now, you may have to.
One more time. Go one more time left, and then we'll go forward again.
See what happens.
There we go.
There we go.
Where the spacecraft will jettison the entry balance mapper in preparation for parachute deploy and to roll over to give the radar a better look at the ground.
Shoot deploy.
The navigation has confirmed that the parachute has deployed and we're seeing significant deceleration in the velocity. Our current velocity is 480 meters per second at an altitude of about 12 kilometers from the surface of Mars.
Heat shield set.
Perseverance has slowed to subsonic speeds and the heat shield has been separated. This allows both the radar and the camera to get their first look at the surface. Current velocity is 145 meters per second at an altitude of about 9.5 kilometers above the surface.
Net filter converged. Velocity solution 3.3 meters per second. Altitude 7.4 kilometers.
Now has radar lock on the ground. Current velocity is about 100 meters per second, 6.6 kilometers above the surface. Perseverance is continuing to descend on the parachute. We are coming up on the initialization of terrain orbit navigation and subsequently the priming of the landing engine. Our current velocity is about 90 meters per second at an altitude of 4.2 kilometers. We have confirmation that the lander vision system has produced a valid solution and part of terrain orbit navigation. We have timing of the landing engine.
Shell set.
Current velocity is 83 meters per second at about 2.6 kilometers from the surface of Mars. The confirmation that the back shell has separated. We are currently performing the divert maneuver. Current velocity is about 75 meters per second at an altitude of about a kilometer off the surface of Mars.
Here and safety Bravo.
We have completed our training orbit navigation. Current speed is about 30 meters per second, altitude about 300 meters off the surface of Mars. We have started our constant velocity accordion, which means we are conducting the sky crane, maneuver. Sky crane maneuver has started. About 20 meters off the surface.
Leading signals from tomorrow. Tango Delta.
Touchdown confirmed. Perseverance safely on the surface of Mars, ready to begin seeking the end of past life.
I've seen that probably 100 times and I still get goosebumps, I tell you.
You gotta ask Luke Walker what his involvement was.
I was in the other room, it wasn't on the video. So I was on the surface team. So Arissa was probably in one of those videos, but I was on the surface room, so I couldn't be for the first 5 days.
Right, absolutely. Yeah. Well, you know, as Robert said, I mean, how many years did you devote to this?
7 or 8.
Yeah. And some more, 9, 10 from the initial design. So we all know, I mean, we build complex systems and we create things that do that. And again, it's always high risk. I always tell people it only takes one thing to go wrong to have a failure, and it takes a million things to go right. And I think in this industry, we all kind of understand that. But again, I think just showing what the power of our minds and creation that God gave us can do. The other thing is, and you guys know this, but after this landing, the president called the team. And we had him up on video. He was interacting with the team, spent about 15 or 20 minutes just talking to the team, and really bringing out the fact that this was an extremely bright light in a rather dark time for our nation and for the world. If you look around, all the, this was flashing up in London and New York Times Square real time. And so it just brought, in my mind, hope to a world that was still dealing with a pandemic and stuck in your house, and yet this incredible team pulled this off. So I think, as I said, just bringing that sense of hope and light and, the fact that God is in control of all this stuff and owns the universe, that's a big role we have in our workplace. So I've got some more eye candy here, so, we all get to deal. Oops, let me back up one. Where we go here? So, anybody know what's going on with the parachute and all those red and white things? That was actually a secret message that our crazy engineers encrypted into the parachute, was it base 7? I think it was like, so anyway, we said there's a message in there, we put it out on the internet, and I don't know, in a few hours somebody had figured it out. And essentially it says, dare mighty things, which is our motto at JPL. So that's pretty cool. And there's the heat shield, there's the rover going down on the sky crane, there's the sky crane itself, and then this was our first picture. We always just take a very quick picture without even, blowing the lens cap off, and so, but proving, hey, we landed, we're safe, everything's working. So, and this was our first panoramic view of Mars as we kind of brought the camera in just to see where we were, and to think that, we're out there on another planet doing this. And, the rover team is there day in and day out doing the planning, developing the targets for our mission. So pretty amazing. And to me, it just gives you a sense of awe that God created this. We're allowed to explore this. This is our first helicopter, or our third helicopter flight. First aeronautical vehicle on another world. So this is the first time we'd actually, instead of just going up and coming down, we went up and translated to the right and came back. And this was just a technology demo, just say, can you really do this in a 1% atmosphere? And yet, we did it. We were going to have 5 flights just to prove the technology. Because it's working so well, we've already had 13 flights. And the scientists are now using it to kind of explore ahead of the rover, either go areas where the rover will not go, or go ahead and kind of see where the rover is going. So it's turned into really a science instrument. And after this flight, the president called us again and spent 30 minutes, with the team. So again, I think it just shows, whether you're working on airplanes or spacecraft or rockets or you're in the business side, this is a powerful domain, aerospace. And it does incredible things for the world. And I think bringing that attitude every day is just a really cool thing. This is just this is the robotic arm, the end of the robotic arm. We've got a couple of major instruments out there. It just kind of shows how we're putting one of those instruments very close to the ground to look for any signs of microbial life and those sorts of things, or extinct microbial life. So just to give you a cool picture at the end of the robotic arm. Whoops, wow, how'd that all happen? And this is just a nice selfie. Part of the big mission here is to actually take samples and put them in these small titanium tubes and store them and ultimately bring them back to Earth. That's our next mission, Mars Sample Return, to go get those things. But this is the first 2 samples we took out of that rock. So you can see where we actually cored the rock, put them in these titanium tubes, and then we store them inside the rover. And we'll leave them there. When we get about 10 to 12 samples, we'll actually take a bunch of them and place them on the surface so the next mission can come and pick them up. So if anything broke on the rover and we couldn't get them out, they would at least have a cache of samples they could get to. But we can bring about 30 samples back to Earth, and we're designing that mission right now. So we'll go to Earth. So finishing up, our planet's a pretty amazing place, right? That pale blue dot, as the Apollo astronauts called it, as they looked from the moon. And God created an amazing world here. In my mind, you can argue with me, but when the Genesis says God created the Garden of Eden, in many ways, this whole place is a Garden of Eden in the universe. Because when you look out in the universe and you look at Venus, or you look at Mars, you look at Jupiter, you can't live there. They're horrible places. Well, Elon wants to live on Mars, and he'll figure it out. But you won't be able to walk around without a spacesuit, right, up on the surface. But, this in a way is the Garden of Eden in the universe. And God created this, and he said, go forth and subdue it and have dominion, but take care of it too. And so I think this aerospace world is also extremely important in taking care of our world. And I'll just highlight a couple of things that we have going. These are a couple of payloads on the space station. One is called EcoStress. It measures plant health by measuring the temperature of plants. And cooler plants are healthier because they're bringing in water, and the water transpires or evaporates, which creates cooling. And if you're in a drought, you're not taking as much water in, so your plants are hotter. So we're mapping pretty much the globe in terms of the biomass, saying where is there healthy plants, where are there not so healthy plants, and really understanding that. And then we also can use it to look at where the fires are in California, which is a direct, positive thing for the state of California and the people that are dealing with wildfires, right? So that's pretty cool. And then we have Orbiting Carbon Observatory 3 here on the space station, which complements Orbiting Carbon Observatory 2, which is in a polar orbit. And I'll really, for all the geeks in the world, this one's in a diurnal orbit, and I'll let the geeks explain what that means if you want to know. But it's not polar. But bottom line is that this is looking for where does carbon dioxide get created and where does it get absorbed. And so, again, as you talk about the impact on the environment and the climate and the atmosphere and all those things, very important for the scientists to have this information and be able to put it into their models and start to understand the whole carbon cycle. So very important. Whoops, back up. So this is just a bigger picture up in Napa Valley earlier this year with the glass fire. So it shows you what we can do with that very sensitive heat measuring device, IR sensor on board EcoStress, and really give the California authorities some great insights about exactly what's going on and where the hot spots are. So all that from space. Let's see here. It's got a very quick trigger. I guess that's it. Okay. This is, I'm going to just highlight a couple of upcoming missions. This is Surface Water and Ocean Topography Satellite, SWOT. It's a radar interferometry spacecraft, which, we've been measuring ocean height for many years with the microwave radar satellites, and it's a partnership with the CNES, this French space agency. This is the next generation where we actually bounce beams down and let them interfere. And that allows us to not only measure ocean height, which we've been doing to see how the oceans are rising, but also it allows us to measure freshwater body heights and flows. So with this spacecraft, we'll be able to fly over the U.S., measure rivers, measure reservoirs, measure lakes, and understand what's going on. And again, just like we talk about the carbon cycle, the scientists want to understand the water cycle. And how many of you are aware we're in a drought here, right? Mono Lake's down and Lake Tahoe's down, and so really understanding this whole ecosystem, very complex, extremely hard to model, but with systems like this, again, bringing value, frankly, to humanity, because water is just an incredible resource around the globe, and it's becoming more fragile. So that's pretty cool, and in fact, as I said, this is a partnership with France as well. We just shipped the payload, the radar payload, which we built at JPL, over to France back in May. They're now integrating it to the spacecraft, which they're providing. Then they'll ship it back here to Vandenberg, and we'll launch it next year. So that's all going well. And I talked to a few folks. This is our partnership with India, the NASA ISRO, Indian Space Research Organization. That's the I, synthetic aperture radar. And so this is another radar system, L-band and S-band, which will allow us to measure things like changes in biomass density, so what's going on with our forests and those sorts of things. Changes in the ice sheets, how are they melting, at the poles or in Greenland and things like that. And also changes in shoreline and what's going on. And then, natural disasters, what happens after an earthquake and how's the earth shifted and those sorts of things. So again, very important and bringing people together, frankly, across the globe, because this is our first big partnership with India, a very capable nation in terms of space exploration. And so this is the payload end. This is where the radar is, L-band and S-band, and that's currently in our high bay right now, getting a final integration and test. I was just in there Thursday. And then we'll ship it over to India, and they're providing the spacecraft bus. So they will integrate it to the bus, and they're actually going to launch it on their geosynchronous space launch vehicle, GSLV, out of India. First time we've ever done that. So aerospace brings the world together in many ways. And again, I think that's something we should be proud of, we should emphasize, we should talk about. Because this is the world that God created. And then I'm going to finish with this because, the things that this group of people get to work on indeed change the world. So let's see. How many of you were born after 1988? Raise your hand. A lot of you. So you do not know a world without GPS. This is a GPS Block 1 R&D satellite. I had the fortune of starting in the GPS program in 1983 as the director of the satellite division. So responsible for launching the last 3 R&D spacecraft, GPS 9, 10, and 11, and then getting the first operational spacecraft through test, and then getting the first operational spacecraft, GPS 13, through test, and then ultimately on orbit. So you think about what GPS has done for the world I mean, you can't even count the ways, right? And back then, we were just saying, does this even work? Can we get a good signal? Can we get a good, accurate solution? Anybody want to guess how big the first receiver was? It was a backpack, literally a man-portable backpack that you had to wear to capture the signal with a big antenna sticking up. Can you imagine fitting that in your cell phone? Yeah. But so this industry has brought so much to the world, and you are a part of that, and you should be proud of that, and you should be speaking into that. But in light of utilizing your talents for the glory of the Lord every day, I think, I hope you have that feeling. I hope you are excited about that. I hope you bring that perspective to your work, to your neighbors, to your friends, and show how, with the talents God has given you, you're helping to make a better world. And ultimately, as Robert said, we will all be a part of the city that God is creating, but we're doing our part here today to be His witness. So with that, I should have finished on that one. This is the next generation. We're already working on the next generation of GPS. That's Navigation Technology Satellite 3. We're providing some of the payloads for that with the Air Force. So moving ahead. So there we go, our motto. And I hope you all feel that you are indeed daring mighty things. So thank you.
Great. Well, we are thrilled to have honored guests from different parts of the industry with us today. So you've already met Larry, who has just a phenomenal career and background. He didn't talk a lot about his Air Force career, which put him on all kinds of myriad programs that Robert touched on. So he's seen a lot of different aspects of the industry. But we also have people that have been working in commercial applications, which hasn't really been talked about as well. We have with us Vincent Zemas. Vince and I go way, way back, college roommates, engineering roommates at USC, specialized in civil engineering, and did a master's degree as well. And I will let Vince tell you a little bit more just about his background.
And God has given me a very diverse background. I started off in facilities, and then was working on satellites, then aircraft radar, and did some commercial work with applying radar to tolling systems. So we brought that to all of our freeways, and also had the opportunity that God took me out of aerospace for a while, ran a automotive industry company for a little while, along with, then went to a plastics company. So God has shown me a lot of different diverse industries, different engineering applications, and I give Him the glory.
And last we have Todd Ellenberger. Todd and I also go back quite a ways, and some of my friends did quite amazing careers. Todd and I worked in the same general field in engineering. I worked for 35 years in aerospace at a combination of Hughes Space and Communications, which later became Boeing. Todd joined after I did and has an extensive background in satellite communications. So he has graduate degrees in that field as well. I'll let Todd tell you a little bit more.
Hi, good morning. So I guess my career path really started when I was 12 years old, tearing apart stereos and TVs and figuring out how, radio worked. And it was just fascinating to me. So that's really what kicked me off, the passion for electronics, communication systems, ham radio. And I joined Hughes in 1989. I had a career in RF satellite payload engineering for a variety of government and commercial satellites. That took me to end-to-end system engineering, system architectures, both military and commercial. And finally, at the end of my career, I was a chief engineer for most of our advanced communication products at Boeing and El Segundo, and also a lot of new business proposal writing. I found that quite interesting and a challenge. So that's kind of where I ended my career.
Very good. Thanks, Todd.
You're the first person I've heard say writing proposals is interesting. I usually hear it's a painful slog.
I'll talk about more of that later.
Yeah, no, that's so great. Well, you can imagine the diversity of experiences over the years presents all kinds of opportunities and challenges for all of us. I worked from electronics design and communications satellites all the way up to what we called end-to-end systems engineering and managing a large directorate at Boeing for integrating spacecraft and ground systems and operations and the entire suite of engineering, and got to work with just an amazing array of interdisciplinary people that were world-class and had just unusual giftedness to see the complexity all come together into incredibly advanced one-off type systems. That's kind of a privilege of aerospace, is you get to build things that not only have never been built before very often, and very often is the case on what you're working on, but won't be built again. Now, a lot of times you're building in relatively small quantities of whatever it is you are producing, and you get to move on to something new and a little bit creatively different, and hopefully an improvement or a different application, and the learning just continues. So that was one of the things that I love personally. But I want to ask the panel, especially our three guests, maybe starting off, when you think about your career in aerospace and you think of opportunities to do things that God loves, like what about this stands out in your mind? And I'm speaking about the work. Often when we talk about being a Christian at work, what we immediately default to is, well, we get to work with other people. So if you have an opportunity to love on another person or a special need that somebody has, usually like a personal need, you're kind of looking for that interaction to care for in a special way. Maybe that would lead to a deeper conversation about the gospel or something like that. But to think about God actively involved in a mission in the world that he cares about, that has everything to do with the work, the engineering, the coding, the design, the testing, the processes we develop to be able to do that, the documentation that makes it coherent and can describe it to somebody. Every aspect of it has some relationship to what God loves, what God's about. And I want to pose that question to our panel. Like, what would be an example of how you see the work that you've done be an expression of being able to love God, serve him well? So, Vince, I'm sure you thought about that.
Well, Stephen, you and I have had these discussions many times over the last 40 years, and as you probably can already understand where I'm going to go, one of the things that we've talked about over the years is how, as human beings, as image bearers of God, we have to reframe our work, what we're doing, as what would be pleasing and what is an attribute of God that we can enhance. So let me give you an example. I'm been part of a radar system on a aircraft that gives the pilot enhanced situational awareness. Well, what's the attribute of God that we're talking about? His omnipotence, or his omniscience. He knows everything. He has perfect situational awareness of everything going on in the entire world and in everyone's life. So what can we bring to the pilot to give him additional enhanced situational awareness that glorifies God, that brings out aspects of God and his knowledge? Well, he knows what's in our hearts. Well, therefore, we're able to determine or help our pilot determine who's a friendly and who's a foe. And we can look at our work and everything we're doing as in God's total creation, his total personhood, and reframe our work to give ourselves not only excitement, but creativity of what can we add to this payload that we're offering this customer to bring out more of that attribute or that image of God that we need to allow that pilot to survive even another mission.
Wow. Very good. Thanks, Vince. Todd.
Yeah, I think likewise, Steve and I have talked about this over the years, and as you posed that question, the thing that came to my mind was, engineering is hard. It's hard. Larry described, you're doing things that have never been done before. You have to create new tools, techniques, technology, new math, write new software. And the number of times that in my career I've been faced with a problem, I had no idea what to do. And I came to my colleague one time, he said, and no disrespect to like bankers or anything, but he said, but if you've been working in a bank for 20 years and someone walks into your branch, chances are they're not going to have a problem you've never faced before in your career. But it happens all the time in engineering and the stuff we do daily. And, those of you, working in this area know that. So for me, it comes back to trusting God, and God gave me, he put me in this spot for a reason. And he gifted me with my particular way of thinking about a problem or creativity to solve a problem, and having faith to, ask the Lord for help, go to bed. The number of times I've woken up the next morning with a solution in my head, it's like, praise be to God, and I think that God, is glorified, and it gives him pleasure when we do that.
Wow. Fabulous. You want to add anything to that, Larry?
The only thing I would add, I think, is just back to kind of, praying to the Lord and this sort of thing. But, as I said, we've been gifted. We all have different talents. We all have different capabilities. But recognizing that we're going to use those gifts, whatever it is, whether it's business and finance, engineering, design, technology, but using those to the utmost. And just starting every day that way, I think, and recognizing, I didn't create a mind in myself that can do math. God did that. I was blessed with that. My wife was not blessed with that, and she reminds me of that. Please explain this to me. But I'm just saying, take advantage of the gifts that God has given you, and acknowledge that, certainly internally, and certainly when you have the opportunity externally. As you walk through your day, just recognize that you didn't create the mind that you have. God did that for a purpose. And this purpose for us is aerospace.
Yeah. No, that's great. In fact, it reminds me, I had a conversation with Sarah Walker, who's sitting right there, about work in the Lord, and thinking about just how do we reframe that, and do we know others that work in the industry that are doing that don't see their work in aerospace as a box they're checking, or just kind of like a passion thing they do on the side, but then, they go do more important things that the Lord cares about outside of work. And she says, well, it's a really tough question because, it doesn't come up a lot at work, when you're interacting, working on projects with people. She said, but there's one person that does come to my mind that really made me think about this. And I met somebody who was a Christian who we decided to get together and pray together periodically about just life and support each other as Christians in the workplace. And the thing that struck me is when we got together and prayed, this person always wanted to pray about the work, the company, the mission, the project she was on. And I said, I've never heard anybody do that. It's like we're always talking about our personal needs. And it's like, that just caused me to think, wow, God cares about all of this too. I think there's like a flip side to this question I've been asking these folks, which is, there's not only unique opportunities to see God and worship and glorify God through the work itself, but there's unique challenges for believers, for people that are trying to follow Christ. And I wanted to get a little bit of a perspective on that. We've kind of been talking about all the opportunities and good things. Obviously, this is a world riddled with brokenness and sin, and the people are all part of that complex problem of good and, bad coming out in all of us, right? Which is why we're followers of Christ in the first place. But we experience how that gets expressed in work context, and there's unique ones in each industry, each type of sector, and there's ones that are unique to engineering and aerospace and the kind of stuff we do here. So I want to just pick their brain a little bit about that as well. So, Vince, you got any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, the unique challenges are, as we all experience, working with engineers who many of them think they know everything and that they can explain the entire universe and how it came into being, and I work with a few of those. But the challenge is to know your faith, to know what you believe, to have a good grasp of the scriptures and of your. I'm a philosophy. I study philosophy quite a bit, so it's knowing your cosmology, your worldview well enough to be able to explain it to those who, you're sitting at lunch and have a conversation. How do you think the world came about? Or a political conversation comes up and you're saying, hey, have you read the book of Esther? And, let's talk about how God works, and yet it looks like he's not anywhere to be found. And it's the challenge is to be confident in our Lord, knowing that he is going to take care of us and we are his mouthpieces and we can speak for him and he'll take care of us.
Yeah. Todd, you are Menosha. Anything you'd like to contribute?
Yeah, I think, Steve, maybe either you or Larry mentioned, there's cost and schedule pressures involved with any project. And, as a Christian, there can be quite a bit of pressure to either, not be transparent or, not be forthcoming. I had a mentor that his mantra was go ugly early and be willing to ask for help and be transparent about when there's problems, because, nothing goes smoothly. I had another kind of mentor that used to say, nothing ever just works. You have to make it work. And that takes a lot of effort. And there's, a lot of, sometimes, errors are made, and to be willing to own up to those. And especially when you have, management and a customer that expects certain progress, it's tough to stand up under that and do the right thing. But in the end, the customer will always appreciate, or your management will always appreciate the fact that you did the right thing and that it works in the end, as opposed to the alternative. So, and I think, being a Christian gives you that backbone and that basis to be willing to let the chips fall for doing the right thing.
Yeah, that's excellent. Do you want to contribute to that? Larry, you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think, as you said, we all live in a fallen world, right? And we all have people around us who, push Christianity, religion, nothing to do with that. But I go back to what, Christ said, before he ascended, before his crucifixion, peace I give to you, peace I live with you, I leave with you. And I think sometimes in our world, just like you said, schedule pressures and cost pressures and things failing, and if you can just exhibit that peace of Christ amidst all that stuff that's going on, I think that speaks volumes to people. And so just having that attitude of, number one, yes, there's going to be problems. Number two, people do make mistakes. We have to deal with that. Number three, people can be hard to deal with, to put it mildly. I had a town hall yesterday on mandatory vaccinations. And boy, some of the comments in the chat were not very good.
Yeah.
But, and some of you may have seen that if you're at JPL. But, you know, having that just confidence and sense of peace and confidence in God and Christ throughout whatever's going on in your day, I think can often speak volumes. Because people just want to know, wow, how do you deal with this stuff? You know, especially as you move up in the corporation or whatever. I mean, you've got 1,000 things coming at you all the time. And just being able to deal with that in a Christ-like way, you know, that's speaking the gospel without speaking, in my opinion. So I think that's one way to deal with it, because, as you said, engineers often think they know everything, as do scientists. We have a bunch of those too. And they'll put it on a slide with 1,000 words too. I found that out. So, so anyway, that's just one of the things I think we as Christians can bring, is just, you know, peace and confidence and helping people get through it.
Yeah, that's so good. A lot of times in our discussions and some of the programming that we do at the Center for Faith and Work, we talk about really leaning in to God's strategy that puts you where you are. And we often culturally think about things. I know I kind of grew up in an environment where, you know, the big guns in aerospace when I was early on in my career in aerospace was Hughes Aircraft Company, which was this monster, you know, with many divisions around Southern California. You had TRW down the street, which had its own history of innovation and interesting projects. And you had Rockwell. Vince was at Rockwell for part of the time. You know, and you had, what am I leaving out? There was Northrop. Northrop was, my father did 40 years at Northrop. I'm a third generation electrical engineer. And I just think of the attitude we all had coming out of school, and then you work for a number of years, and then something doesn't go right. And it could be like career trajectory wise, or you get on a project that's not interesting or whatever. And it was very commonplace. You go down the street, you go find the neighbor, they give you a job offer, salary bump. 5 years later, you come back. And then sometimes it wasn't even about the work, it's just about kind of the opportunity for career advancement, status, get things on a different track, perception of, you know, taking advantage of what's out there. As a Christian, God puts us in situations, and he strategically puts us in situations, and we often think about times getting rough and then reframing that as an opportunity to live out your faith well in a place that so needs someone to. And I really had to learn that lesson many times over the course of my career, of feeling like, I mean, you stay at a company long enough, you'll end up on a project you don't want to be on. Or you'll get knocked out of management because the company contracted and they were just, you know, they decided to get rid of, you know, 18 levels of management, right, and thin the company down. Or you go, I remember getting assigned to a project because there just wasn't enough work to go around to work on some test equipment. And it was basically a refresh of some old test equipment that was on a legacy program, and the test equipment was breaking down. They needed this stuff, kind of the designs, to be refreshed and rebuilt to do basically the same thing. And what I remembered hearing from my father was, who worked in Northrop for all those years, in terms of career counseling, he said, one tip I'll give you of several that are important to me, but if you have a choice, don't end up in anything associated with test. Because if you think about the life cycle of a program, you know, the guys in the front office of a program that are basically doing the upfront program proposal and design work early on, bake in a bunch of stuff. Requirements usually change somewhere in there. Schedules start to slip. And then over the course of the project, who inherits all the pressure and cost and schedule to get this thing out the door, right? Anybody that's involved in integration and test. So whether it's the test equipment design people or it's any aspect of it, it's just kind of, and you find that the people working on that end of the engineering sometimes aren't the most prestigious, highly educated, people that are recruited into the company either. So you're working with people that can be more discouraged about their work. The work's not as sexy, one thing. So I ended up on this project to, refresh and test. It was going to be about a 2-year stint. And the first thing that came to my mind was, my career's over. I need an out. I need an option. I'm thinking about all those options everybody's been talking about. All that, go down the street, find something better. And I kind of thought, so many good things have happened here. I see how the Lord has been faithful. I'm just going to wait this out and see what happens. And I ended up meeting a number of people in the course of developing this test equipment that I would never have known because they're in these test departments, and getting to know some of them. It's just some of them were just some wonderful people, some very interesting talent. Learned why they built things the way they do, how to operate, and just kind of got to know the organization. Then I moved on to a development project eventually. And then I became a manager, and then all of a sudden we had an enormously large program that we won, and we needed to write specs for and make sure that we got the people developing brand new test equipment to do what we needed them to do. And what typically happened is the test equipment that would show up on our program would be late, and it would have problems. It was kind of the reputation of our group. So I thought, shoot, we're going to inherit this on the back end of the program. I don't want that to happen. So I got together with a manager who I'd gotten to know while I worked on that test equipment project. And I said, I'm going to cut a deal with you. I'm trying to think out of the box. I said, I'm going to give some of my design development budget to a few of my best engineers, and I'm going to assign them like 6 to 8 hours a week to work for you on this project to develop this equipment. I want you to use these guys to help make sure the designs are sound, the test and verification program of the test equipment makes sense. Everything does what our specs that we wrote would do, and it would integrate better. And I'll take the hit. I'll take the cost hit for doing that. And do you think they said no? They loved the idea of having these high engineers come on over. It was like motivation, inspiration for them. The equipment worked better. We ended up with a collaborative relationship. If something didn't work, who we could work with. And so it's like opportunities like that you think on the front end, this is screwed up, God. Why are you doing this? This is going to tank my career. And then God will use it in a redemptive way. So those are the kind of things that strategically God's doing all the time, over and over. So I really encourage you to think about that. I want to open up to you folks. If you have questions for any of us that this might have got the wheels turning about, you'd like to think something through better from your perspective. So go ahead and ask it. I will ask the speakers up here to repeat the question. We're recording this, so we'll have it on the recording. Yes?
Yeah, how does being in a classified program environment change all of this and how you think about it? But if you've heard part of my bio, I was the Director of Signals Intelligence of the NRO, so I lived in a SCIF 24/7. We actually have classified work at JPL that we can't talk about. So I've had a host of classified missions projects. And, I think in one aspect it changes because you can't necessarily tell people what you do, right? You can't go home and vent to your spouse or your friend or your neighbors about But the flip side is, in my opinion, I mean, you're still working with a team. You're still interacting with people, and often in a, frankly, more tight environment, I would say. Just, during the pandemic, our SCIF stayed open 24/7 because we had work to do. They couldn't do it from home, right? You had to come in and do the work because it's all classified. So we figured out how to do it. But you can imagine that was a pretty intense team environment, with all the rules now and everything we had to deal with. So I think in some ways you have more opportunity, at least within the workplace, because you're in an environment where you guys are all in this same boat together. You all can't go home and talk about it or talk about it to your neighbors. So it builds, in some ways, a tighter sense of camaraderie. So that's a good thing. The hard thing is, like I said, you can't go off and express the joy of what you're doing and talk to it with people. And so that's a downside in a way, but I think the team part is interesting.
I bet Todd's got something to say on that.
Well, I think Larry pretty well said it. So I spent most of my career working government classified, and it is a challenge. Prior to my retirement, just like Larry, I drove in every day to work in a closed area, and it is a tight-knit group, and we essentially teleconned and collaborated, within the closed area, just like people were on the open side on Zoom every day. So it was very similar, and one aspect of that, I worked with a new project manager on a technology development for almost a year during COVID. And at my retirement party, I finally met her face to face. I didn't know, who is that? Oh, okay. And so we finally met each other. And so, it is a challenge, but I think there are a lot of opportunities. And if you can, stand not to have your cell phone, with you, then you're doing well. But if you can do a mix too, I think that's healthy.
The times that I was in closed areas were some of my greatest times of spiritual growth. God really, because as these others have said, you're so confined with a team that you're really in each other's lives and faces all the time. And so it's, I remember back at times in which they were in my face because I deserved it, and because I wasn't, because in those environments, as you know, you have to be absolutely precise in everything you do and everything you handle, and the processes of handling all that documentation. So I look back at those times as some of the richest and spiritually growing times in my career.
Yeah. Good. Other questions? Yes.
So I think that's a great question. And I think, I ended my career as a chief engineer in risk management, and putting in, all those, off ramps and plans for in case are very important. And I think, probably one of the best examples in the Bible of good project management in that way is probably Nehemiah. If you look at how he organized to get that wall rebuilt, the wisdom and the, putting in place guards in the right place, and having the folks doing the work being invested in that area that they were working, just so many aspects of that. I take a lot of, insight from the way, Nehemiah approached that rebuilding the wall and the wisdom that he showed. And I think we can do that in our careers too.
And let's go back to what Manosha was praised for earlier. It's just that God, since he has perfect situational where he has perfect knowledge of every contingency that could go wrong or can, that just to, in my program management, I pray every day, God, open my eyes to what I need to see today and to understand where I need to lead or protect today.
Yeah, so good. Yeah, somebody else. Sarah.
So the question was, how does knowing Christ influence how you lead and how you interact with people? And I think it's absolutely the core of how you interact with people, really. You know, none of us are perfect. I'm not perfect, but, you know, in my mind, I try to say, this person is a child of God, created by God in His image. And so trying to walk into a meeting or into a discussion with that attitude helps. Is it always perfect with some really tough people that you have to deal with? No. But I think having that attitude really goes a long way to say, okay, I don't agree with you, you're kind of making me angry, or, you know, you're creating a bunch of problems where you don't have to, but, you know, God created you, and, you know, you are a child of His. And so just having that attitude when you deal with people, having an attitude of humility, no matter what level you're at. I go back to, again, I didn't create the abilities that I have. God gave them to me. So, I mean, but yeah, it's tough sometimes dealing with people, but you know, you've got to listen. I mean, we've all had managers who speak over you, or who, you know, are the loudest voice in the room, and you can't do that, you know. You have to be humble, you have to listen. Ultimately, as a manager or leader, you've got to make a decision, yes. People may not be happy with your decision, but ideally you've brought them to a place where they understand and they move forward. But I think it starts with humility and recognizing that this is still a child of God, no matter how much they're driving me up a wall. And I've got some of those people, and I think we all do, right? In your work groups or people that are working for you, but, you know, having that attitude just goes a long way. But
And along with that is the humility of that I rehearse every day of Romans 8:29, which is that everything that comes into my life from God is to make me more like Christ. So when I meet the difficult person, when I'm sitting there in a difficult situation, I know God has brought this into my life in which to help me reflect Him, but also become more like Christ.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think something that's worked well for me with teams is, you know, as a Christian, I want to be approachable. I want to open door policy. You know, I want to be humble in hearing from the team. And I think, you know, the respect that you build up with the team goes a long way. And sometimes, you know, things are difficult and certain folks don't work out, and it's not really fair to them or anyone else if they're in that role. And sometimes the best thing is to find a different place for them, and just, you know, working with each person that way in a way that, you know, seeks the best for that person. I think if they realize you're doing what you're doing, you know, for their benefit as well as the team and the project, I think that goes a long way.
Yeah. One thing that comes to my mind is have grace for people being very complicated and having backgrounds that you, in many cases, know nothing about, that makes them what they are in the workplace and act the way they do. Sometimes can be amazingly beautiful and productive and collaborative, and other times it can be I'll feel like it's all the opposite. And you're trying to figure out, how do I help them? I want them to grow. And yet God's only given you this very limited lens to see their lives through. And so praying for them to where God, who knows the entire story, is huge. And then just having the posture of always wanting more for them, always on their side, looking for how they could benefit from however this works out the best, whether it is maybe not even being on the team, because that's just not best for them or the team. And you don't know what's best in a lot of cases, but have the right posture towards them. And then pray that God will give you insight and opportunity over the people that you get to know over a long haul, to hear more and more of their story. And then you can be more both accommodating as well as like challenging them to step up in appropriate ways. I had a friend that worked for me for a long time who was Chinese and very gifted analyst. That was kind of her background, systems analyst. And I always was trying to get her to step up into more of a leadership role. And she'd always back off. And a new program would come along, and it was like she was obviously like the next person in line to take like a more senior leadership role on this program. And I challenged her with that. I tried to talk her into it. I get the program manager to everywhere. She'd always say no. And it was like after years of this going on, I was having one of my like annual reviews with her. And then she finally just said, Steve, here's the deal. And she has a very unusual background. She goes, I grew up near Beijing, and my father was a prominent university professor in China. And then it got to the point during my childhood where he took sides along with a lot of other university professors for sort of this nationalist policy that fell out of favor with the communist government at the time. And she said she was 7 years old, and there was one night where she was at home with her mother, and Dad didn't come home. And he never came home. And she said, I've got something in me that says you don't want to be a leader. Leaders are prone to be working with very bad people. I can't deal with that. And it was just like something kind of built into her psyche. And yet she was incredibly gifted. And I kept thinking of what a creative way she can grow and use this. And China had sent her to an international university. I actually went and studied engineering at the University of Mexico. And years later, we got this huge contract with the government of Mexico to build out a mobile communication system for the government, for the country of Mexico. And she had done all this work at the University of Mexico. She spoke fluent Spanish. So she speaks fluent Mandarin, fluent Spanish and English. And so I put her on that project, and she ended up being the technical liaison with all of the customers' technical people that they contracted. She helped translate everything for all of them. One of the key customer people went to school with her at the University of Mexico. She ended up having this enormous influence over the success of both winning the program as well as executing on it and communicating the progress and the technical health and everything. It was just like huge. And it was so fun to watch God provide a way for her to grow and blossom with the background that she had that I just didn't understand, and it just kind of unfolded. And I realized it's really this beautiful thing that sort of is blooming out of this sort of very difficult, challenging circumstance. So pray for people, and then take a posture of curiosity and interest and openness as to what God might show you over time. Yeah. Other questions? Yes, in the back. So the question was asked, the person who asked the question works in a different field where they interact with working on genes and chromosomes and analyzing and seeing the amazing complexity and beauty, and then having sort of this epiphany of God's glory through what He's made when He's made the complexity of the human beings. Have we experienced similar like aha moments in our career of seeing something that just sort of revealed God's glory and the complexity of aerospace or engineering? Maybe want to take a crack at that.
I'll go back, frankly, to my presentation in a way. I think I spoke to that a little bit as just, again, growing up, being fascinated with space and just this incredible universe that God has created, and just acknowledging the power of God to do all these things. And again, being blessed to come to JPL and just see that unfold with the discoveries that are happening and seeing the complexity of this universe that God created. I mean, that just, to me, it brings it together of just this amazing world, this amazing universe, this, when we say omnipotent, and you think about a galaxy and billions of galaxies, each with billions of stars, that's pretty omnipotent, right? And so that's the moment for me, is just this recognition that as we can see further and further into the universe and see the incredible size and nature and how it came together. And, I always tell people, in the first, I'll get it wrong, like the first 6 nanoseconds of the universe when it was created, all the physical laws were defined, right there, And so God said, this is the way it's going to be, and billions of years later, it's the way it is. So that's kind of, for me, that, in a way, an aha moment. Yeah.
Yeah.
You can understand working with genomes or the JPL. Mine was, I was given an assignment in which to derive an equation that ended up being about 6 pages long. And when I was done with it, I was in a worshipful moment of God's order. And I remember sitting there looking at this when it equaled out and going, God, you're amazing.
I think for me, it really started, as I mentioned, when I was young, just the magic of radio. And to me, I built a little, ham radio transmitter and put a wire up on the roof, and I could talk to someone on the other side of the world. And to me, that was magic. And that really sparked, a quest for knowledge. And how did that work? What's the physics behind it? How do I build that? And now, we have these cell phones and the internet, and, it's just been, for me, fascinating to see that area just grow to what it is now. And probably the other magical moment for me was actually in my undergraduate when I first learned about digital signal processing. And I'm like, I can do that just crunching numbers on a computer. I can write some software and it can implement, all these things that typically had to do with, electronic circuits and stuff. So I don't know, it's just seeing God's, the beauty of his mathematics, being able to implement it and, make cell phones or whatever. It's just miraculous to me.
Yeah, for me, I think of, I came off of that test program I described earlier, and I within a year or two, I got to work on a big research and development project. The parent company we worked for agreed to invest $1.5 billion of R&D to develop a never been built before commercial satellite system. It was going to be just filled with new technology. And I got on this little piece of it to work on the downlink part of the payload. And I had to, over a 2-year period, I was supposed to develop some technology of some components that were going to go into it. And then I was supposed to, do the design of that part of the system, the subsystem. And then I was supposed to simulate the whole thing and how it would work in more of an end-to-end environment. And which was it was sort of a culmination of, if you had like the cherry project you'd ever want to work on, this was it. It was kind of like I'd arrived to get to work on something like this. And I just remembered loving doing it. And then I got to the end where test results came in from some of the pieces, and I plugged them into this big simulation that I had been building out and designed, and then put the actual test data in place of my models of the thing. And I wanted to see, is this like going to work and meet spec? And then the whole thing finally worked. And it was just, I was so, like the word I wanted to use was blessed. I was just like, I just get to be here right now and see this happen, and everything's coming together and meet spec. This is going to be very cool. This is like, and it's a better version of the stuff we've done in the past. It's just really cool. And I'm thinking, who do I get to share this with? Okay, so there's my boss, who's this like world-class, brilliant engineer, who put me on the project, and I show this to him, and he kind of goes, well, I hoped it would work. We just paid you 2 years worth of blah, blah, and then there's like my colleagues who are all involved in similar things. It's kind of like, and they're doing their own thing, right? And then it's like I go home, I'm going to explain this to my, my toddler at home, or I'm going to explain this to my wife who, hasn't been working around this kind of stuff. She doesn't know what I'm talking about. I get my friends at church. What are you talking? And then like my aha moment was, the Lord gets this. The Lord gets this. This complicated, beautiful thing for me, like the word elegance. And, it's like, it works. And it's like, I realized I get to share this with somebody who like has done this in spades. And this is an expression, a little expression of what he's like. And, like the word worship suddenly dawned on me that that's an appropriate word for that experience. And that gave me a context for that was so profound for me. So that's my piece. I think we're right up about time, so I want to have everybody thank our panelists.
Okay, I'm over here crying as I'm hearing these stories, and also just this whole experience, because Jesus is the Lord of Aerospace. This is his domain, and to have those who know Jesus Christ enter into it as a career, and to unravel what it means to walk in obedience in a field that is his own as his children is a beautiful thing. And I've been moved by your stories about what it means to live out your faith, and very grateful for that. And so this is what we do at Center for Faith and Work. I mean, I get emotional about this stuff. I love this stuff. I was a keynote speaker on fashion. It has nothing to, I don't even know what you guys are talking about up here, but this is all beautiful. Yeah, it's a book called Fashion Theology. It's not aerospace. It's not rocket science. So, but I'm very moved. And so I just want to thank all of you for coming out today as an act of just desiring to walk in obedience in the vocation that you have. It really has just been a really encouraging time. So thank you to all of you. We do have some evaluations on the table. I don't want anyone to leave without turning in an evaluation because we want we're very encouraged by this turnout today, but we want to keep improving in these events. And so please grab one of those. You can take one of the pens with you, but please make sure you turn in one of those before you leave today. We have all kinds of cool things happening at the Center for Faith and Work. Our next Reimagining Work is on finance. And I'm imagining I'm going to show up thinking finance, and then I'll probably be in tears because it's so moving. If you know anybody that does corporate finance, personal finance, banking, there's so many different levels, and you think this would really be an amazing experience for them, please let them know that is coming up in January. If this just began to work something inside you a little bit and you want more to go a little deeper in understanding how to live out your vocation to God's glory, we do these 6-week courses. If you're signed up with Center for Faith and Work LA at our website, you'll be alerted to that. We're looking at doing another one in the next 4 months, 6 months, somewhere in there. Exciting annual conference coming up April 2nd. We always bring nationally recognized people that can speak into faith and work, and that's really exciting. And then finally, I want to alert you to a program that is kind of our capstone program. It's a 9-month intensive discipleship program called Framework Fellows, and it is phenomenal. It's just a phenomenal thing. We really spend deep intentional discipleship. There really isn't a program like this in LA. If you want somebody that's going to invest in your life over the long haul for 9 months, in which it is going to radically change your life. And so you might want to look into that as well. That's also on our website. So that is what I have by way of announcements. I'm going to close our time with a kind of prayer of benediction. And I would ask all of you to stand up, because this is a prayer in a certain sense asking for God to bless and work in all of your lives. Please join me in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, our hearts are full as we've come together this morning to pray for those who are working in the aerospace industry, including those in this room. You are a God of design and innovation. You designed and you built this world. Lord, you made so many things. The first clothes for humans. You provided the specifications for that enormous ark. You laid out the exact designs and planning for the temple, its structure, its purpose. And then ultimately, Lord, you are the designer who designed our redemption when you took on flesh and blood in the person of Jesus Christ, who himself worked as a carpenter. And you've called us to explore and harness your creation for ways to glorify you and foster life and flourishing. And we've come together, Lord, to encourage each other in this calling. Please help your people to be faithful engineers, faithful scientists, faithful assemblers, faithful technicians, faithful project managers. May they generate a culture of transparency and innovation and responsible resource management and collaboration and mutual support. Lord, we pray that you would help them as they inform design trades, give them wisdom and prudence. Lord, help them to improve the old techniques and discover new ways to code and simulate and model and develop the products that provide new insights to the workings of things and how, Lord, give them understanding how they may serve your purposes in this. Lord, we ask, God, that you would aid everyone in this room, Lord, whether they're administrators or technicians or planners or assemblers in all aspects, that they might cause things to run smoothly, that they might perform their tasks with excellence to your glory. Lord, we pray that you would give those in aerospace, Lord, the sense of the nobility and mission to their work, to advance human understanding of this world that you created. And as they explore and open up this world and all of its beauty, may they be moved to worship. May they have aha moments. Keep all of us, Lord, from false hubris, from pride. Give us the humility and kindness, Lord, that is a mark of you, God, a God who knows everything and yet came in humility as a servant. Give all those here joy in bringing order from chaos and elegance and structure, Lord, to produce well-designed components and subsystems and systems that you, Lord, might be glorified. And then finally, Father God, we pray, great God, that you, the Lord over this aerospace industry and all its endeavors, would be with these servants here today. May they be a blessing in their work and to their colleagues. Provide them, Lord, with your goodness, your favor, and presence in all they do. And we pray in the mighty name of our Savior Jesus. And all God's people said, Amen. Thank you so much for attending.